bullied for being poor, ignored for being different. But when her fingers touched the piano, the room went silent. One performance, one girl, and nothing at Hawthorne would ever be the same. The early morning sunlight spilled to the gleaming black iron gates of Hawthorne Heights Academy, the most prestigious private high school in Virginia. Sleek SUVs rolled one by one into the school courtyard, pulling up to the crimson carpet that stretched to the front steps of the main building. From the car stepped groups of students in meticulously tailored uniforms, designer handbags slung over their shoulders, and eyes full of certainty, as if the world itself belonged to them. Across the campus, an old district school bus rumbled to a stop. Imani Brooks stepped off, her gray backpack frayed at the straps, her once white sneakers faded to dull. No one turned to look. No one smiled or waved. At Hawthorne, Imani wasn't anyone. She was 15, living with her single mother, Danielle Brooks, a night shift nurse at the local hospital. Their home was a 2-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of an aging apartment complex, where the windows barely muffled the sound of traffic and the heater always broke in winter. But Imani never complained. She woke early every morning to make breakfast with her mother before heading to school, a place where every day felt like a quiet battle to avoid being swallowed whole by cold stares and contemptuous looks. Imani crossed a stone-paved courtyard, silently weaving between chattering groups of students. A few glanced her way and whispered. A scoff rang out from the right. "Look, it's the scholarship kid," came a familiar voice. Chloe Whitmore, her golden curls softly curled, her blazer tailored perfection, and her expression dripping with undisguised disdain. "I wonder if she can afford lunch today." Imani said nothing. She lowered her head and walked faster. In her backpack, there was no expensive lip balm or silver laptop like her classmates. Only a packed lunch her mother had made the night before, and a few pages of old photocopied sheet music. The same music she played in silence every evening at Woodbridge Baptist Church, the only place she could touch a piano. And that was the one thing Chloe Whitmore could never take from her. Imani moved swiftly through the marble tile hallway, the glossy locker doors reflecting the soft yellow lights like cold steel. Each step felt like gliding through a world coded in brand names and bank balances. "Hey, look who's back, Miss Discount," Chloe's voice echoed, soft but sharp enough to carry. Her friends burst into laughter, Miranda, Gloria, and Ryan, their names as tied to Louis Vuitton purses and the latest iPhones as Chloe's. Chloe didn't need to shout. Her sarcasm was a blade, cutting deep with barely a touch. Imani tightened her grip on her backpack straps. She didn't turn, didn't reply. That's how she survived at Hawthorne, through silence. But silence didn't mean she didn't feel. Every taunt was another stone added to the weight on her small shoulders, already too used to carrying more than any girl her age should. "Careful, or you'll lose that scholarship just 'cause you can't afford a new laptop," Miranda added, smug as if it were common sense. Or maybe she's using a computer from, 2005? And still wearing last year's winter coat. Gloria chimed in, running her fingers through salon-perfect curls. "Truly a fairy tale, huh?" Imani bit her lip as she stepped into the music classroom, eyes fixed on the floor. The room was quiet, soft light pouring in from the windows, casting a glow on the grand piano that sat in the center like a solitary island. She took a seat at the very back, pulling out a slightly crumpled A4 sheet of printed sheet music. No one noticed her, and in that moment, she was secretly thankful for it. She glanced out the window, where maple leaves had begun turning shades of amber and crimson. In a world where people were judged by designer shoes and luxury cars, all she had was music, and that, more than anything, set her apart. She didn't need anyone to know her name. She didn't need their validation. But one day, when the laughter and mockery had faded, they would have no choice but to listen. Not to her excuses, but to her music. When the final bell rang, Imani didn't rush out like the others. Instead, she walked slowly to the back courtyard of Hawthorne Heights Academy, a quiet space few ever visited, then turned down a narrow alleyway leading to Woodbridge Baptist Church, a modest red brick building with weathered gray shingles. Inside the church was the only place she ever felt at peace. The afternoon sun streamed through stained glass windows, bathing the space in hues of red, blue, and pale gold. In the far corner of the sanctuary stood an old piano, its paint chipped, a few keys cracked. But Imani, it was the most beautiful piano in the world. She set down her backpack, pulled out the bench, and sat. Her fingers hovered over the keys, brushing them gently as if touching memories. She'd never had a music teacher. No private lessons. No glossy instruction books. Everything she'd learned came from YouTube, library books, and long, quiet evenings in this church. Just her and the piano. While other kids watched cartoons or posted on Instagram, Imani listened to Chopin through cheap earbuds, trying to replicate each note with her small, determined hands. She made mistakes, many mistakes. But every wrong note was a lesson. Every retry made her heart beat a little harder with the hunger to improve. Music wasn't just a passion for Imani. It was her language, her escape, her truth. Here, she wasn't Miss Discount or the scholarship girl. Here, she was herself, a girl who felt deeply, dreamed quietly, and was willing to sacrifice for what made her heart come alive. Sometimes Joseph, the church caretaker, would stand at a distance and listen, saying nothing. Once he walked over, placed a hand gently on her shoulder, and said, "You don't need an audience. You just need to keep the fire." Imani nodded, wordless. She knew she wasn't great yet, but she knew this. No one could take music away from her. And one day, that fire would rise, not to burn, but to illuminate. That day, back at Hawthorne Heights Academy, music class was held in a grand room with a vaulted ceiling and a gleaming Steinway and Sons piano at its center. Students sat scattered in groups, laughing, shrugging, half-heartedly copying down notes. Everyone except Imani. She sat at the back, quiet as always, writing down every word the teacher said with careful focus. At the front of the room, Mr. Langston Hale, a tall, lean man in his 50s, always dressed in charcoal suits and expensive cologne, stepped into the center of the classroom with a cold smile playing on his lips. "Music isn't just technique, class," he said, hands folded behind his back. "It's emotion. It's expression. It's the one thing you can't fake." Chloe Whitmore, seated in the front row, flashed a smug smile. She had performed at 4 galas and once played piano at the mayor's reception, courtesy of her father's invitation. Everyone knew Chloe was the star of the music program. And Mr. Hale, of course, was the one who made sure she stayed on that pedestal. Then, Hale glanced around the room. A pause, oddly theatrical, as if he were setting the stage for something. "Imani Brooks," he called, drawing her name out like a challenge. "Would you like to try expressing your emotions? Or are you only familiar with music through your earbuds?" Laughter erupted across the room. Chloe turned around with a smug curl of her lips. "Oh, come on, Mr. Hale," she smirked. "She probably doesn't even know what a Steinway sounds like." Imani felt her face flush with heat. She could refuse. She could lower her head, shake it slightly, and let them win. But inside her, she heard her mother's voice again, familiar and firm. "No one gets to make you smaller than you are." She stood up. The laughter died immediately. Mr. Hale raised an eyebrow, perhaps surprised that she actually rose to the challenge. Imani walked to the piano and placed her fingers gently on the keys, saying nothing. She sat at the Steinway, her hands resting softly on the keyboard as every eye in the room froze on her. She didn't need to introduce herself. She didn't need to apologize for not being on their level. No one spoke. The silence wasn't out of respect, but out of anticipation, tinged with a hunger for spectacle. They wanted her to stumble, to falter, to retreat in embarrassment. But she didn't. Imani took a deep breath, then lowered her hands to the keys. The first note rang out, a soft, dreamy melody, delicate as morning fog. She began to play Nocturne for Brave, a classical piece few in the room had ever heard of. She had discovered it on a grainy old YouTube video and practiced it night after night on the worn-out piano at the church down the street. No one in the class knew the piece, but that no longer mattered. The melody flowed from her fingertips like water, natural, unforced. The grand Steinway, worth tens of thousands of dollars, responded not to prestige or performance, but to something deeper. It had finally found someone who spoke its true language, not through fame, but through soul. Chloe, who had been sitting smugly with her arms crossed, slowly straightened up. The smirk vanished from her lips, replaced by a stunned expression. The quiet chuckles that had once filled the room evaporated as if they'd never existed. Even Mr. Langston Hale, always composed, always in control, tilted his head slightly, his brows furrowed, as if questioning everything he thought he knew. Imani paid no attention to anyone. She didn't glance around. She didn't need to know how they were looking at her. In that moment, there was only her and the music. Every note carried something personal. Memories of her mother slumped over the table after long night shifts, rainy afternoons alone with a chipped piano. It all poured out through her fingertips. The class seemed to hold its breath. That kind of emotion couldn't be faked. It couldn't be taught with money. It couldn't be copied from a textbook. As Imani reached the final passage, a single high note lingered in the air, then fell like a whisper. The room remained still. For a moment, no one even dared to clap. Not because they didn't want to, but because they didn't know how to respond to something that real. Imani opened her eyes, staring straight ahead. She wasn't looking for applause. She had simply chosen to stand up and let the music speak for her. The last note of Nocturne for the Brave faded like the final dewdrop on a petal, gentle, but leaving behind something that lingered. Imani sat still, her hands resting on the keys, her breath steady but her eyes lit with fire. She didn't smile. She didn't bow. She just looked forward, as if daring anyone to question her again. The classroom was hushed, not out of disinterest, but from being utterly shaken. Chloe Whitmore, who just moments ago lounged in her seat like royalty, now sat stiffly. Her usual poise was gone, replaced by a visible unease. Her hands gripped the sides of her chair, as if she'd been pulled out of her safe bubble. Gloria and Ryan exchanged glances, no longer snickering. But what truly stunned the class was the reaction of Mr. Langston Hale. The veteran music teacher, known for never losing composure in front of his students, stood frozen. His once crossed arms now rested at his sides. His eyes were fixed on Imani, not with disdain, but with something between disbelief and respect. His face betrayed his confusion. And then, something no one expected happened. The music room door swung open. Ms. Evelyn Grant, the literature teacher and head of the school's art scholarship committee, stepped inside. She paused, her gaze sharp yet warm. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said gently, though her eyes never left Imani. "I was standing outside, and I have to ask, where did you learn to play like that? Who taught you?" Imani hadn't yet answered when Mr. Hale, for the first time with a slight tremble in his voice, spoke up. "No one. She taught herself." A quiet murmur rippled through the room. Ms. Evelyn gazed at Imani, her eyes alight as if she had just discovered a diamond in a field of dust. "Do you know what you just did?" she asked softly. Imani shook her head. "You just made an entire world fall silent to listen." The room erupted, not in laughter this time, but in stunned, silent stares. For the first time, no one looked at her with mockery. For the first time, they saw her. The girl they called Miss Discount had just become the one person in this elite classroom who left everyone speechless. Imani rose. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. The music had said everything for her. She stood, her hands lifting from the piano keys, like a warrior laying down her sword after a battle no one expected her to win. But she didn't smile. She didn't bow. She didn't wait for applause. The class remained frozen in silence. Chloe lowered her eyes, not because she lacked words, but because anything she said now would sound hollow. Mr. Langston Hale, who once stood tall in judgment, was frozen behind the lectern. He swallowed hard, as if searching for the right words. But none came. Imani didn't wait for him to speak. She stepped forward slightly, her gaze steady and sharp as a freshly honed blade. "I don't need your praise," she said clearly, her voice ringing to every corner of the room. "Because everyone has talent. The question is, did you ever look for it, or did you only look at the tuition?" A wave of shock moved through the classroom. A few students turned to each other. Ryan raised his eyebrows. Chloe and Gloria shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But before anyone could react, the classroom door opened once more. Mr. Warren Whitmore, chairman of the school board and Chloe's father, stepped inside. Still holding the phone he had just used to watch the performance through the school's internal live stream system. "Langston," he said, his voice calm but commanding, "I watched the whole thing, and I think we need a meeting." Mr. Hale's face went from pale to flushed. He straightened his collar, opened his mouth to respond, but Mr. Whitmore held up a hand. "This young lady didn't just silence a room," he continued, eyes locked on Imani. "She made me, a man who's seen hundreds of professional performances, stand up and applaud." The entire class held its breath. Then he turned to Chloe. The warmth that usually softened his gaze was gone. "And if I find out that anyone, including my daughter, has been intentionally bullying a gifted student, I will not let it go unpunished." Chloe turned pale. Imani walked back to her seat, not saying a word. But just before she sat down, she turned one last time, looking straight at Mr. Hale, who now resembled a man dethroned. "You teach music," Imani said quietly, "but I'm not sure you've ever truly listened to it with your heart." Then she sat quietly, as if she hadn't just shaken the ground beneath that entire classroom. No one moved when the bell rang to signal the end of class. The room remained frozen, students seemingly glued to their seats. Something had shifted, tangibly, unmistakably, but no one could quite name it. The side glances were gone, so were the stifled laughs. All that remained was silence and eyes. Imani slowly packed her things. Her fingers still trembled slightly from playing Nocturne for the Brave, a piece she had taught herself, felt with her own soul, but her heart was calmer than it had ever been. Not because she had finally been acknowledged, but because she had finally stood up. As she slung her backpack over her shoulder and stepped out from the front row, a voice called out behind her, "Hey, Imani." She turned. It was Jordan Miles, a soft-spoken Asian classmate who usually sat beside Ryan and had never once spoken to her. He stepped closer, rubbing the back of his neck, clearly nervous. That piece you played," Jordan said, eyes sincere, "I've never heard anything like it. It hit something deep." Imani gave a small nod, about to respond, when another figure approached. It was Ryan, hands in his pockets. He gave her a short nod. "I used to think you were just a seat filler in this class," he said, letting out a breath. "But today, you shut us all up. Respect." Imani paused. The word respect, coming from someone who had once laughed at her, hit harder than expected. It landed somewhere deep inside her, like a note that lingered in the air just a second longer. And then, the most unexpected thing happened. Gloria, Chloe's ever-present shadow, the girl who had never strayed from the royal court of Hawthorne Heights, stepped forward. No smug smile, no cutting glance, just Gloria, looking almost unsure of herself. "Chloe's not going to like this," she murmured. "But I just want to say, I think I judged you wrong." Imani said nothing. But for the first time, the stares from her classmates didn't make her feel small. In fact, she felt taller, right there in the same room that once made her shrink into a shadow. And as she stepped out of class, the late afternoon sunlight streamed through the window pane like a spotlight shining on a star who had just taken center stage. She hadn't gone far when a warm voice called from the hallway to her left. "Imani Brooks?" She turned. A tall, slender woman with silver-gray hair pulled neatly into a low bun stood at the doorway of the administrative office. It was Ms. Evelyn Grant, literature teacher, head of the Art Scholarship Committee, and one of the most respected faculty members at Hawthorne Heights. She was known for being strict but fair, and, most importantly, one of the few people in the entire school immune to last names and bank accounts. Imani slowed her steps, a little apprehensive. "Why, yes, ma'am." Ms. Grant nodded, eyes fixed on Imani as if studying every shift in her expression. "I'm still very moved by your performance." Imani looked down, a bit flustered. "I was just trying not to embarrass myself, ma'am." A small smile formed on Ms. Grant's face. "You didn't just avoid embarrassment. Imani, you silenced the entire room. And that's something I haven't seen in a very long time." Imani looked up, eyes wide with surprise. "Did you know we have an internal music scholarship program at this school?" Ms. Grant continued. It's typically reserved for students with formal training, or those nominated by Mr. Hale. But today I'd like to nominate you. Imani could hardly believe her ears. The offer felt like a door creaking open, a door she never even knew she had the right to knock on. But I don't have a private teacher, she stammered. No professional recordings. Imani, Ms. Grant interrupted gently. I've seen many students handed opportunities just because their parents knew how to make the right phone call. But in your case, the music spoke for itself. I don't care where you learned or how old your piano is. I only care about what you just did, something none of my students have ever done before. A pause. Send me your application by the end of the week. I'll take care of the rest. Imani bit her lip, her eyes stinging. She nodded slowly. For the first time in her life, someone stood by her side, not out of pity, but because they truly believed she was worthy. Late that afternoon, the golden light of sunset spilled across the cracked sidewalks of the Woodbridge apartment complex on the south side of town. Imani walked quickly through the familiar streets, her heart full. The old backpack on her shoulders swayed with each step. But today, it didn't feel heavy with textbooks or taunts. It was filled with hope. She climbed to the third-floor unit, where warm yellow light spilled through the window. Her mother, Danielle Brooks, still in her nurse's scrubs, was in the kitchen preparing a simple dinner of roasted chicken and steamed vegetables. Hearing the door creak open, she turned. "You're home, Imani? Everything okay, sweetheart?" Imani didn't answer right away. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms tightly around her mother, holding her as if afraid she might disappear as she let go. Danielle, startled, quickly embraced her back, running a gentle hand to the hair of the daughter she had raised through long, exhausting double shifts. "I got nominated for a music scholarship, Mom," Imani whispered, her voice catching in her throat. "Ms. Grant heard me play, and she believes I can really do this." Danielle's eyes filled with tears, though not from surprise. She had always known there was something special about Imani. It was a world that hadn't been ready to listen. But now, someone had. That night, in a small room just big enough for a wooden desk, Imani powered up her old laptop, its dim screen flickering. The title read, Hawthorne Heights Academy, Arts Scholarship Application. She typed slowly, carefully. Full name, Imani Brooks. Art discipline, classical piano. At the final question, why do you deserve the scholarship? She paused, took a deep breath, and began to type. I don't have a private teacher. I don't own a Steinway. I don't have someone picking me up after class. But what I do have is something no one can buy. Love for music and the resilience to never give up. I don't need pity or a handout. I just need one chance. And if I'm given that chance, I'll turn it into something no one saw coming. When she clicked submit, something inside her changed forever. Not the music, not the scholarship, but how she saw herself. She no longer needed the world's approval to know she belonged, because the greatest miracle is when an ordinary girl dares to believe in something extraordinary.